Good evening. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you're joining. Hope you're having a great day. Today, I'll be talking about React plus Storybook equals, hopefully this works. Come on. Okay. Beautiful UI. That's what I wanted to show. So my clicker is not working. Cool. Okay, my name is Deepa. I'm a Google developer expert for web technologies. I'm also an organizer for Google Developer Group San Jose. I am an ambassador at Women Tech Makers. Here's my Linktree QR code. You can scan it. I'll also post this at the end too. Every top right slide would have my LinkedIn handle. So this is going to be kind of not really like what Shane presented because this is mostly with UI stuff. So I'm going to be showing a little bit of I'll be switching around screens as well. So some assumptions that I'm making are, if you are here in a React meetup, you should already be knowing all these things. So I'm not going to be touching, or I'm not going to be talking more on that. So the agenda is I'll start off with component driven development, and we'll deep dive into Storybook and what is it, who uses it, how do you use it, and then how do you write a story? How do you, when you write a story, how do you add controls to it using arguments, parameters, decorators, etc. And we'll also see Storybook comes with add-ons, essential and installable, default ones and an installable one. We'll talk about it. I thought I will do Q&A at the end, but then because the slides were so much, I thought, okay, maybe I should break in between. So I will definitely stop in between to ask questions. So somebody asked in the chat, Dara, I think, a lot of things are coming up. What do you pick up, right? So it all started, this is I picked this from online. This is a evolving front-end development, right? You start off in JavaScript in 1995 ES1, and then it goes all the way till ES13 now. So this is this basic graph is until 2019, but we are still closer to it. Nothing new has come. But if you see around 2010, Angular.js started coming, and then React in 2015. Then you have a lot more other framework, libraries, whatever you call it. So there's a lot going on in the JavaScript ecosystem. So it's moving, it's always changing. So it's hard to keep up with, I do understand, but then most of these are very similar though. So what is component-driven development, right? Or a driven methodology. This guy called Tom Coleman in 2017, he introduced this component-driven methodology. So he thought that there is a shift, there is a UI development towards component architecture and process. So it is a process of building bottoms up. So he states that if you start off from the very small piece, and then you can end up at pages and screen. For example, you start off at the top as build one component at a time. It could be an avatar, a button, an input, whatever. Then you combine those combine them and put it inside a form. That would be your second step. It's combining components. So you start off with a simple component and then build on top of it to make it composite component. So once you do that, you can assemble all these things into pages, like you can do it as homepage, settings page, etc. And then finally, you integrate it with data and your backend, and then backend APIs and services. So that way you will have a whole page ready, right? So this is something that I wanted to start off with. And what is Storybook? Storybook is a development environment and a playground for creating UI components. So it runs outside of your application, and it runs in isolation, basically. And you do not have to deal with logic, API, or any data. You just focus mainly on those UI components, right? Understand that it's just a developer environment. if I can. So who uses it? So at Adobe, we use it. At Adobe, Microsoft uses it, Airbnb, Shopify, and there are over 30,000 applications, which I cannot list it all here. So I just wanted to give you just the major ones. So we at Adobe, we use Storybook for creating our own UI component library. So if you see, Adobe has many pages. You have stock page, creative cloud page, and all these UI components, it has to be seamless across, even though it is from different products. It comes from different products as a whole, but then the UI should look very similar and branding has to be there for Adobe, right? So we use Storybook along with our own CSS framework called Spectrum for building our UI components. So together, when we have this together, we can circulate it amongst our teams, collaborate with cross-organization. That's where Storybook comes into play. So here is a React complex component. If you take at the top, if you have a lot of, it's a huge component tree, and instead of breaking it down individually, and you don't need to look at this huge component. You just have to focus only on, not on the whole tree, but single component. So what Storybook does is it supports different framework libraries. You can use TypeScript, JavaScript. It also helps your web performance. You can test it out locally and try to see how it works. And then it supports accessibility. And it also helps in testing. You can use testing framework like Playwright, Jest, etc. So understand that when you're creating a huge, when you're working with a huge React application or a complex one, if you want to focus on at a component level, you can use Storybook at that time. So like why in isolation? Like I said, you can use reusable components when you focus at the component level. The code quality of building in isolation helps you focus one component at a time. And like I said, you can also collaborate with different teams, and you can avoid duplication of work too. So these are some of the things. I will be showing you a static side where you can make it as a UI component library for your own applications. We'll see that in a moment. So how do you install Storybook? First off, you need to have Storybook won't work without an existing React app. So you should have a React app, or else if you want to try to use Storybook, if you are trying to learn about it, you can first create a React app, and then you initialize Storybook using this command. It supports Yarn as well. There is a Yarn version of the same thing. You can try. And Storybook recently released their version 7. So if you have already used it, and if you're trying to, if you already have 6 installed, if you're trying to use, it might have some hiccups. So you have to, at that time, upgrade Storybook to 7. I had this because I had a version 6 demo project, or I had to move it to 7. So that's how I was able to build the static one. So understand that if you have any hiccups, look at their documentation. They suggest you to upgrade Storybook first. Once you initialize it, and if you see, it creates a folder. And on the left, it creates 2 folders. One is .storybook, and the other one is stories. Inside the .storybook, you have 2 main files. So these are configuration files. One is main.js. And if you see around inside the main.js file, you would have stories, which would pick it up from, this is the main entry point to your Storybook. So it will pick up anything from this source folder, stories, and then it looks for all these files here, and it basically fetches it. And Storybook comes with add-ons, essential add-ons, which we'll be talking about in a moment. And in the preview.js, it comes with default configuration, which you can change it. For example, if you want your components, like I showed how Adobe had all these components laid out in an alphabetical order, right? If you want to specify it, you can specify it inside preview.js. So these are the two files. And then what is a story now, right? A story is a function that describes how to render a component. And Storybook uses something called as component story format, and they recommend you to write stories in that way. So it follows ES6 recommendation. And you describe all the states inside a story, right? So just to give you once inside the stories folder, you have these stories, button story. You have a header story. The moment you say initialize Storybook with that command, it creates you with these default ones. So it would, when you want to run Storybook on localhost, you would say run Storybook command, and then it'll open up in the localhost. If you see on the left-hand side, there's a side panel on the playground. This is called as a playground. That's what Storybook calls it. So in the playground, on the left-hand side, the sidebar, if you see, there's an introduction file, which also matches here on the project folder. And if you see, there's a button with all these three files. There is a styling, there's a JSX, and then there's a story file attached to it. So you have the same thing for header, and then you have for pages too. So this is how Storybook Playground looks. And inside your package.json, because Storybook runs only in a dev environment, you will see all these things inside in the dev dependencies. And it comes with essential add-ons such as control, background, docs, viewports. You can, when you create UI component, you can test it out right away in different viewports. It supports small mobile, larger mobile, tablet, and then you can also see it on a desktop too. So it comes with all these things in the playground. So on the if you open this on the local host, you would see this is the toolbar at the top. It's an essential add-on, and also the control comes with in the panel. So we'll be seeing a demo in a very quick moment. So you can also add docs where you can add code snippets. This is very useful because when you're working with cross teams and you can figure out how UI components are created, you can reuse them to your own projects too. So this comes handy. Now I would want to show in localhost, if I can share my screen. There's my Chrome. Okay. See, this is by default, whatever I showed you earlier, by default, this is the introduction file. And then I have the code here. Hang on a minute. So this is the one, yes. So this is the demo one that I would want to show. Here we have story, dot story. And can you see my VS Code by any chance? No, right? I think I have to create that test. Okay. Let me do both. Share. Cool. I think you can see it now. So on the left, you see, on the right, you see VS Code where I have the story.story book with two of these files, main.js and preview.js. And if you see, I have it organized as inside the source folder, I have it as components at the top. This is what you will see it here too. And then there's button here. The button has 3 files into it. There's stories. And if you see inside this, I'll be talking about what is the export default and the named default, but understand that these are, these describes how a component should look like. This is a component per se. Inside this component, there's a button. This is what it represents too. We'll see all of it in a minute. And this is also, I wanted to show, when you create a Storybook project, it'll come up with, this is a toolbar, like on the top, like I showed you, there's a smaller mobile, large mobile, and then tablet, you have it. And then you can also reset this. And you can also make sure that you can have, if you want to see how it is placed in the canvas, you can still do that. And these are grid view. There's a lot more to it. And if you see inside this one, controls, I don't want to do this because it's distraction. So, and I can also set it to dark mode and light mode too. See, I have a dark mode, which you can see my button there. So you can also set dark and light mode to test it here. And then, for example, if this is a primary button, I can make it as, I can also toggle to see whether it's, if it can be primary or not. I can change the label and say I can say submit button, and I can also choose the color here, whatever I have to customize. By default, all the buttons come in medium size, but you can change it if you want it to small or large. So, and you can add actions and interactions to it, which we will see it in a moment. Same thing, and note that there are two files here. Let me change this light one. So there are two files, two stories here, logged in and logged out, right? So I changed the name here already. For example, let's say React Chicago or React for now. So if I do this, it changes. And when I say log out, it doesn't do anything here, but then it shows login and sign up here. And note that they're logged in and logged out here does not interact with the page component. So these are all separate stories. They don't interact with each other. So understand that every single component that is here are stories inside. So let me go ahead and share where's my keynote? I'm going to stop this. How about this? Cool. And okay. So we saw the local host for this. And is there any questions so far? I'm going to be taking out questions. Is there any questions? Will it be?
I actually had one.
Sure.
I was curious what your VS Code extension was that colorized the color code.
I can check it for you. I did this yesterday because somebody told me the same thing last time. It's the color. It's Tomorrow Night Blue.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Tomorrow Night Blue. So if there are no questions, can I move on? Okay, can you explain why would you, like you would explain it to a 5-year-old. What is the purpose of Storybook? A company-wise dictionary for components. It is for a 5-year-old, yes, you can do the same thing with React, but then if you're working in a large code base and you have different UI components to deal with, like I said, it becomes very easy. This is not meant for a smaller project. If you're just doing it for a single page or for your own portfolio, this might not be a relevant one. Honestly speaking, you can do that with, there are other frameworks that you can use it and you can do it very quickly as well. So this is for if you want to have, if you have many different product lines and if you want all your UI and branding to be catering towards your company, then it would be really helpful. So is there an add-on package to show accessibility? Yes, there is an add-on. I forgot to put the, I have it on my code, but then I forgot to put if you go into Storybook documentation, they have it as NPX, something related to Storybook at Ally, something like that. So yes, you can add. Storybook comes with a bunch of add-ons, which we will be talking in a moment. Okay, we'll be talking about accessibility particularly. So if I can move on, please let me know if I can move on. Okay, I'm assuming it as a thumbs up. So, like I said, you can create different components. You can create, you can create checkboxes, coach marks, divider, dialog box. And if I don't know how familiar you are with Airbnb or with Shopify app, you can create your own websites using Shopify, right? So for Shopify to use all these UI components that they have, if you want to build those, if you want to customize those things, you can use them. And they mainly use Storybook for their UI component library. It's like you can have your own personalized collection of UI component together. And you can also serve it as a static website so that you can collaborate with your teams, if that makes sense. So how do you write a story, right? I said that we'll be talking about how do you create these things. And here is an example inside a button story. Here there are two exports. One is default and the other one is named. And the default one describes at a component level, right? For example, you have title. This is what you would see on the side panel. I had forms, and inside form, there were buttons, right? So you can have properties inside it, and title is a mandatory property, which you cannot miss, and the component is optional, but it's good to have. If you're creating an action bar, and you have different variety of action bars, and you want to sort it out properly, and you want to define this, okay, I want it as action bar, then you can put it as action bar here inside of this component property. And the named exports they describe stories. So each of them are individual stories, and you would see it in a different variation. So this is what we saw in the earlier one, right? Inside the button component, you have separate stories. Submit is a story, next is a story, and all these buttons are. So how do we add controls to it, right? We can add controls to this using, there are a lot many more ways to do this. Again, I picked up the basic 3 from Storybook. There is a lot more to it right now. So you can add controls using parameters, arguments, and decorators. So earlier we saw inside of our button story, we have those named and default export, right? So for the parameters here, inside your default export, you can define a method with static metadata for stories. For example, here I have backgrounds, right? And if I want to set it for different values, for example, I can set it for cyan value, blue color, and a red color, etc. So you can provide configuration to various add-ons. So this is all at a component level. See, here's I just have a video of this.
But if I go to next, it's also
the background
is cyan, and then here is also cyan. So if I go ahead and change this background to blue color, right? So note that everything will also change to blue. So again, if I go ahead and change this to green, it changes everywhere. So these are the ways that you would add parameters to it.
So that's a component level of changing the background, right? You can define it using parameters. So arguments. Now moving on to arguments. Arguments these are nothing but objects. So which has key value pair. Here you can also define it at a story level or at a component level. So here I have the button for success here. I'm exporting it using template.bind, which is nothing but a JavaScript technique to make copies of your function, right? So, and this is from Material UI. I'm using Material UI kit. And note that when you're using kits like this, you have to make sure that go read into their documentation as how they define the success button or a submit button should be. They have different properties inside their documentation. And if you go ahead and look inside this and make sure you give the same key value pair based on that. So here is another, I added inside this, I think I can show this right away here too. Let me change it. So here I have this and I'm changing the controls right down, and note that I made a mistake of putting the variant as outlined with a capital O. When I did that, it just did not show up. So when you can set up controls using your material UI too. So when I do this, the actions is also, it triggers the click action as well. So next, moving on to decorators. This is, decorators are a simple way of wrapping up one piece of code with them. Basically, you're decorating it. At a, here I have, again, the default export, I have also added styling for margin of 3. So if I go ahead and, oh gosh, you can add decorators in 3 different ways. Again, globally or component-wise or story-wise. Globally, how would you do it? For example, you want all the buttons in your web pages throughout multiple pages. You want them to have, you want a margin of 3M, then you can do it. So any global decoration that you want to add, you can add it in preview.js. So the configuration file, which I showed you earlier inside of .storybook folder. Then component decorator, same thing. We did see this inside of export default. You can add this. And you can also, if you do that, see, I'm trying to do it as a decorator at a component level. So when I do this, all the buttons will have 5M margin. And inside the story, you would add it like how in the named export as well. So now let's move on to add-ons. Add-ons, like I said, there are so many add-ons with Storybook. You have it for Figma. You can mock with, there are some mocking add-ons, Redux. They also have recently, they have it for Next.js, different, for other framework APIs too, where you can do it with Next.js and one more, I think Svelte as well. But Remix is coming up to Storybook too, but it's in the pipeline of their releases. So how do I add, right? Once I forgot to put the command for adding accessibility, but you can look into the documentation. I think it's npx, something to do with add-on ally. Once you do that, you would see it inside your main.js. So once we add this, you would see inside of the control panel at the bottom of the playground with the accessibility tab here. And it can also run, it can tell you whether it will run an, I think it runs an audit kind of a thing where it checks for whether the UI component is compatible with accessibility. And if there are anything that is major, it just tells you. Here it does pass, but then it's a critical button. So it just tells you what are the things it should have, and it did pass through though. But if there are any violations, it'll show it up here. So this becomes easy when you are developing, you are also developing components based on which are also accessible, right? So, okay, so far we talked about how do we build, how do we create stories, how do we add controls at a component level, at a story level. And also we did see how to add decorators at the global level too. So how do you build Storybook? This is all good, but when you want to build, you use this command run build Storybook. It'll create a folder called Storybook static, -static. I think it creates with a bunch of stuff. And then you can deploy it based on that. What I did was I just threw this thing inside Netlify. If I can share that screen, hopefully it works. Okay, where is my browser? Share. This is the Netlify one that I used. So if you see, this is a doc, the same example that I showed. You can create, you can change the colors here, right? So these are the background that we set it up as a component-based one. And you can also see by default, if there is a input, I can say hello, world, whatever. Well, no, I don't know whether I spelled it right, but if I can go here. This is a small size one. I can also add it. It's an input field. So I just made it in different colors. So you can see this, and then you can also add, I don't have any controls added to it, but also I added this. You can have a button, you can have an input and a button too. So it's basically, you can have, if you want to do a sign up page, or if you want to type in something or an address or something like that, you can create those things. And also, this is what I was trying to show earlier. This is the button one. And if I say contained, I think. So it just changed here because I'm using Material UI, and I can also change this to any color that I want to. Oh no, there's a bug. That's a good one because I couldn't change this. I have to, you can go figure out what mistake I did. I did not test this when I did this, but this is something that I have to also read. It says that it's undefined. Maybe it does not take the color here from Material UI. I did not, maybe success should be in that particular color, which I had no clue about it. So I have to fix this. This one is something that I need to figure out. So sorry for this. I didn't test this properly before. But this is with Material UI. I'm pretty sure that I'm not using the right thing. So moving on to this one. Cool. We have this. So what are the pros and cons, right? I talked a lot about, you can create it in isolation. You can build clean and fast UI. You can serve it as a static file, and you can have improved documentation. It becomes very easy when you're working with different teams and you're dealing with different stakeholders like product managers, designers, backend engineers, you know, and cross-team collaboration efforts. So those are the things that can come handy with this tool. But every tool comes with some kind of drawbacks. This is still a new one. There's a lot of there's limited integration still, and then it can also be time consuming to set it up. If you already have if you have a large code base, it can be really time consuming to go through every single component, right? So that's one thing. Also, it adds additional layer of complexity. So Storybook 7 is out. They have, this is what I was talking about. They have a new framework API for Next.js and Savalti-Kit. And they also had come up with component story format version 3. There's new UI design. The earlier ones did not have, if you had seen the screenshots of the playground that I had showed earlier, the earlier ones had something called as canvas and doc. Now they have removed it. So there's subtle kind of changes, and you can test these things very well. So they also added some testing frameworks to it, and the coverage is better. And yeah, it basically enhances your you can add it to your CI pipeline too. And with this, you can also have your own design system for your company or any large projects that you're using. And there's something called as, if you want to create a design system per se, Storybook also uses an add-on called as Chromatic. You can try to check into that add-on too. So to summarize, we talked a lot about Storybook. We said how to write stories, how do you add controls to it, how do you build and deploy it as a static website. So if you want to build it in Storybook, and you can reuse it everywhere across your projects. So your next step would be, like I said, I showed only 3 controls, but there's knobs, play functions, etc. And there's also mocking is available. It also, they have a add-on for Redux too. So you can try to, mix and match all those add-ons available and try to make use of this open source tool. So performance-wise, you can see, like we said, it instantly showed us the error right away when I did something, right? So that way it's fast. So you can also try to do a lot of testing per se, as how long does it take to load and things like that. And you can try to use it along with Angular, Vue. They also support, I think, other web components, etc., like Polymer and things like that. I've not checked it out, but we mainly use it with React. So thank you so much, Bill, and thank you so much for everyone who attended this talk. So here's my QR code if you want to scan. If you have any questions, please let me know.